Hello YouTube, and welcome to a couch vlog. Coming at you from my couch here in beautiful Sterling, Virginia. And we're going to be talking about one of the most misunderstood and feared topics in all of motorcycling. I think you know what it is from the title. I hope you can read because it's trail braking. So we're going to basically present this in three parts. Part one, what is trail braking? What the hell does that even mean? Part two, how does trail braking work from a physical perspective? Part three is going to be, how do you get started trail braking? If you're not someone who trail brakes all the time on the street, in the wet, in the dry, in every condition, if you're not someone who does this, then how are you going to get started? That's what I'm here to explain, these three things. But before that, cheers. Let's have a little shot. Oh yeah, a little water chaser. Good stuff. So let's just jump right into this. Trail braking is probably the most misunderstood and feared technique in all of street motorcycle riding. So a little disclaimer, this presentation or video today is going to be focused on street riding. So riding on paved roads in the dry and paved roads in the wet. And that's it. I'm not going to be focusing on trail braking as it relates to track riding, and I'm certainly not going to be focused on trail braking as it relates to dirt riding. That's a completely different set of techniques. Trail braking is really three separate techniques, if not more. But I'm going to be focusing on trail braking as I do it. Okay? So first off, let me define trail braking in my perspective. I don't want to use a dictionary definition or someone else's definition. I'm going to use my definition, okay? So I'm going to sum it up in one sentence, and then I'm going to expand upon it just a little bit to explain where I'm coming from for the rest of this video. So in one sentence, trail braking is using the brakes while applying steering angle to the motorcycle. That's it. You're turning and braking, or braking and turning at the same time. Now, trail braking for me is a front brake only technique. I use trail braking only with the front, but depending on the type of motorcycle you have, you can use both the front and the rear, or you can even use the rear only if you're off-road. But when you're on the road, trail braking, even on a Harley, or your Indian or whatever cruiser you have, is a front brake technique. And I'm going to explain this further in part two. Alright, but keep that in mind. So let's be a little more specific, right? Trail braking, more specifically, how to do it properly is apply the brakes while your motorcycle is straight up and down, and continue to apply the brakes as you steer. Now, by continue to apply the brakes, I do not mean apply more brake pressure. No, 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 no. You're either going to have a steady brake pressure or a decreasing brake pressure as you apply your steering. You never want to add steering input and further apply the brakes, ever. If that is something you are doing, that is one of the biggest reasons motorcyclists crash in turns, is that they apply steering, they're increasing their steering angle, like i.e. the go right, they are pushing right and continuing to push right, and as they're doing that, they are squeezing the brakes or jerking the brakes, even worse, harder and harder. You don't want to do that. You want to do your hardest braking while the bike is straight up and down. So that's all there really is to it. So let's talk about just an example corner, okay? We've got, say, a nice road with a nice straightaway. We're going at a reasonable speed, say 60 miles an hour in a straight line. Everything's nice, you can see everything, and then this is a road you've never been on before. You see a couple things. The first thing you see is a sign that says right-hand turn, like a U-turn, and it says 15 miles an hour. So you're going 60, and the suggested speed on that turn is 15 miles an hour. So you think to yourself, I'm going to have to slow way down to make this turn. I don't know what's coming. I can't see through the turn. I don't know what's going on. So what you're going to do, if you are like me, so what I would do is, I'd wait until I get fairly close to the turn. I would slowly apply the brakes, okay? So I'd squeeze the brake lever a little bit and then continue squeezing it more until I'm slowing at a rate that makes me feel comfortable. As I start to approach my predetermined or in the moment determined turn-in point, the point where I'm going to start my steering, I start to release the brakes and I start to release the brakes a little. Once I've released the brakes a little, I start to give it a little churn, a little, input into the bars. I push right to go right. And as I'm pushing right to go right, I'm releasing the brakes. I'm turning and releasing the brakes at the same time. Okay? And my goal here is to do one thing, and that is to line everything up at the apex of my turn. Now, the apex of a turn is a point you select. And that point is where, if you've done everything correct, you've released the brakes, and at the same time that you fully release the brakes, you're at the slowest point of your corner, i.e. you do not need to slow anymore. And at the same time that you've hit the slowest point of your corner, you've hit the maximum amount of steering input. That is, your bars are turned counter to your direction, so you pushed right as far as you're going to push. And all of that happens at the exact same time. That's very difficult to pull off in a corner you've never seen before. But with actually a decent amount of practice, you're going to pull it off more often than not. And when you don't pull it off, you're going to kind of curse at yourself and go, what the heck was I thinking? I should have done X, Y, and Z. And that's where I want to get you. I want to get you to the point where you're trail braking perfectly almost every time. And I'm talking about sight reading roads, seeing roads for the first time. There's no excuse. If you've been through the road 50 times and you know the turns, you should be trail braking perfectly every bloody time without any issue. So let's talk about the physical mechanics of trail braking a little bit now. I'm trying to keep this video relatively short, so I'm skipping over a lot of things, and I'm also trying to keep my thoughts nice and flat without repeating myself too much. So let's go over the physical mechanics of things. The first thing you have to understand about trail braking is the grip of your tires. Now, I say that like it's such a simple thing, but there are a million different little things that influence the grip of your tires. But let's talk about the most important thing that influences grip. And that is something called the normal force on your tire, okay? So imagine it like this. You have two hands, right? You press your hands together and you slide them up and down. You make that shape, right? That's all well and good. Now I want you to do something else where you press them together and really push hard. Push hard, like it kind of hurts, right? Now try to slide your hands up and down. It takes a lot of force to do that. Why is that? And how does that apply to trail braking? So the first thing you have to understand is the difference between static and dynamic friction, okay? So let's begin with that. There are two kinds of friction. There is static friction, where the friction resists the movement and nothing is moving with relation to each other, okay? Then there is dynamic friction. That is the friction that is resisting the movement, but things are moving, okay? So I'm going to ask a little question of you and think about it for a second. Which force is stronger, the static friction force or the dynamic friction force? Just think about it for a second to yourself, and then I will tell you. Okay. The static friction force is anywhere from 5 to 20% stronger on the road than the dynamic friction force. So when things are locked together and not moving, the force of friction resists the movement more strongly, like significantly more strongly than the movement than the force that is resisting the movement when there's actual movement between the two surfaces. Isn't that crazy, right? So the thing you gotta think about is you want to, as a motorcyclist on the street, keep static friction going at all costs. You want to avoid sliding for any possible reason, okay? That means locking the rear brake, don't lock your rear brake. Locking the front, oh, do not lock the front. Going over gravel, dirt, logs, anything like that. If you are at a high lean angle and you go through gravel, dirt, logs, you're gonna have a bad time. We're gonna talk about how to alleviate that in a little bit. But your best bet to avoid crashing in gravel, dirt, trees, whatever, is to just not go over it at all. But anyways, excuse me. Let's continue. So the second rule is that friction, whether it be static or dynamic, the level of friction is proportional to two main things. Number one, the coefficient of friction between the two surfaces. Now this isn't something you can just calculate, but think of it like this. The stickier your tire and the stickier the surface, you know, the tarmac, the pavement, the more friction you're gonna have. Simple, right? That's your number one contributing factor to actual traction. So when the surface is wet, you lose a little bit of grip. Let's just be honest. You just lose it. We all know this, but you do. You actually don't lose as much as you think, but you do lose grip up to, say, on a road that's nice and soaked through and is drying out. You might lose 10% grip. On a road that has just been rained on and is just starting to get wet and all the oils are coming to the top, you might lose like 30 to 40% of your grip. On a road that is just covered in water and literally you're not even touching the surface, but you're touching the water and you're hydroplaning, you might lose 90% of your grip. So you have to be a physicist a little bit. You have to kind of judge how grippy a surface is. Now, I'm gonna give you a little tip, and I don't like this tip, and I mean, I am not responsible for any injuries that might occur, okay? This is your foot, right? This is the road. Take your foot, kind of angle it up a little bit, and just lightly press it against the road and feel the road surface. When you're unsure about the level of grip of a surface, just feel it. If the road surface feels porous and bumpy and it almost hurts when you do that, you know you've got a good bit of grip going on. When the road feels really smooth and slick, you know you've got good grip, but the road's a little green. It's not your tire's not locking in to that road. When you put your foot on the ground and it feels like a freaking ice skating rink, well, watch out. Go slow. Don't lean that much. Whatever. So that's the next thing. Now, this next little tidbit I'm going to talk about, this next rule, this next law, I'm going to explain. It is hard to explain. So let's just get at it, okay? From a physical perspective, the amount of contact surface between two objects doesn't really matter as much as what's called the normal force being applied to the objects. So, this is something that's very hard to explain. Most people are going to say when you're leaned over, you have less grip than when you're straight up and down, because less of your tire is touching the road. That is not necessarily correct, okay? Less contact patch does not necessarily translate to less grip. The important thing is the normal force. Now, the normal force is literally the forces that are applied directly, i.e. at 180 degrees, like this, towards each other. So imagine the road is down here, and imagine your tire is up here. The force pushing straight up and down on the road, and the force of the road pushing straight up and down on your tire, that is what matters. Now I'm going to put a little caveat on this, because that is a physical law. Laws from physics are physical equations that can be used to make numerical estimations that are often correct as long as the assumptions are made. Now the big assumption here that is being violated, and I'm skipping over a lot, the big assumption that's being violated here, and the reason that more contact patch actually gives you more grip, which is true, more contact patch gives you more grip with all else being equal, and the reason for that is that your tire actually has a different coefficient of static friction depending on the contact patch. Now that sounds crazy. The reason for this is that your tire actually wears, right? You notice the tire sheds its rubber onto the road. And as the tire sheds its rubber, its coefficient of static or dynamic friction actually changes. So I'm getting into some really complicated physics here. We're talking about big partial differential equations that can't even be analytically solved. And if you didn't understand those words, don't worry, it's not important. The real upshot is that there's three things you need to think about. The first thing you need to think about is your coefficient of friction. The more stickiness that you can establish between the two objects, the more grip you're going to have. So a warmer tire, a tire within its traction window, I should say, so it's warmer than its lower threshold and cooler than its upper threshold. A tire within its traction threshold, and then a nice grippy pavement surface that hasn't been rained on, doesn't have any loose stuff, isn't too old, etc., etc., is going to give you the most grip. The next thing, and something that is exactly as important as the first thing, according to the equations, is the normal force. The more, I'm going to use the word pressure, the more pressure that you can apply between the two surfaces, the more friction you are going to get. And again, friction is grip. The more friction you can get, the more friction you can get. Now the third thing is a second order effect. Again, if you don't understand what that means, don't worry about it. What I mean is, it's a less important but very real effect, is that the more surface area between the two surfaces, between your tire and the road, the more surface area of your tire that is touching the road, the more grip you're going to have. So you have to weigh your priorities, and you have to weigh your priorities in that order. So coefficient of friction, the level of, the grippiness of the surface, and the proper pressure and the proper temperature in your tire. That's number one. Number two, right below number one, more normal force on the tire you're trying to use means more grip. Number three, way down below, more surface area means more grip. That's it. So I hope I've explained this pretty well and have given you something to think about when you're going riding. All right, now I'm going to continue on. How does this apply to trail braking? Well, in motorcycling, we have a bit of a law. It's not a physical law, it's not an equation, it doesn't do anything, but it is a law. Because if you violate this law, your chances of crashing are very real. And we have to understand that single vehicle motorcycle crashes happen all the time, and they cause a lot of deaths, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. So that law is, the law is load the tire before you use the tire. So that comes in to the second rule that I set. Gosh darn it. That comes into the second rule that I set. And that rule is the normal force between the two surfaces determines how much grip you have. So what you need to do let's say you're using the front brake. When you hit that front brake, your motorcycle, when you're going at a constant velocity, 60 miles an hour, in a straight line, you're just cruising along, okay? When you apply the front brake, the motorcycle tilts forward. You know what that does? That increases the normal force on your front tire, thus increasing the level of grip on your front tire. So what you want to do is slowly apply the brakes. Even in an emergency, you want to slowly apply the brakes so that the front tire has that extra grip you need before you start asking for it. Okay, remember the difference between static and dynamic friction? Static friction is two objects that are not moving against each other. Dynamic friction is two objects that are moving against each other. In terms of riding a motorcycle, static friction is when you're not sliding. Dynamic friction is when you're sliding. You know what's going to happen if you ask too much of the tire? It's going to start sliding and your level of grip is going to significantly decrease. 5 to 30% minimum. I mean, it's just going to dive bomb. You have no grip. When you are sliding the front tire, you have no grip and you're along for the ride, and whatever happens, if you live through that and you don't have any significant injuries, well, then you should consider yourself lucky. So I implore you guys, the number one rule for trail braking and the number one rule for riding a motorcycle is load that tire before you use the tire. Now I'm running out of batteries. I'm going to switch my batteries and I'm going to come back. All right guys, I'm back. Got a fresh battery in there. Reset my timer because I only have 30 minutes to record anyways. And this video seems like it's going to be going pretty long. Maybe 30 minutes. A little winded walking up and down the stairs. I'm a big fat guy. You gotta understand that physical fitness is very important for sporty motorcycle riding. It really is, and it's something that holds me back big time. Anyways, one more thing before we continue on the video. Since I did get up, since I did move, it's time for another shot. Oh, that was a big one. Water is truly the best chaser, guys. Fight me, I'm right. Anyways, let's get back into it. So, once you've loaded the tire and started working the tire, why does trail braking physically make it easier to steer? That's kind of the second law. And I skipped a little bit ahead, but the second law of trail braking is that trail braking makes it easier to steer through a corner. Now, why is that? It seems counterintuitive, right? You're applying more normal force to the tire as you're steering. You'd think that the friction between the tire and the road surface would actually resist the steering. And I hate to say it, I don't really get it. It's so counterintuitive, but it's true. If you go out there and try trail braking in a parking lot, please, in a parking lot, you're gonna find that it takes less force to steer the bike while you're trail braking. So if you're just like this, gripping the bars and steering, it takes a certain amount of force, but if you're on the brakes a little bit and you turn the bars, it takes less force. What the heck? I think this has to do with the way the tire rolls and the way static and dynamic friction works. There's a lot going on. And I actually also think that, and I think some people who hypermile and are very cheap aren't going to like hearing this, but trail braking causes more of the tire to shed as you go through the turn. So the tire actually sheds more readily its carcass onto the road. And that shedding allows the tire to slip and turn a little more easily while still maintaining more traction. Now the third law, that second law is all well and good. That extra steering, or I'm sorry, that extra kind of help, they call it power steering. It almost feels like power steering. And that's how I was explained to it by, some extremely prolific riders. So, beyond the power steering effect, that gives you confidence, right? It's not actually gonna save your life. Let's be honest, it's not. But it's going to give you that confidence. And confidence can save your life. Okay? So the third thing, and this is the very important thing, is when you come into a road hazard in a blind corner and you're already applying the brakes, it's going to take you a lot less distance to stop. Now, CanyonChasers.net has just come out with a video that influences this video here. So I implore you, okay, if you have not already, go to CanyonChasers.net and watch their videos, okay? I want you to go look them up right now. I'm gonna give you 5 seconds to go do it. All right. So I hope you pulled that up and now we're back. You don't even need to be looking at me. Why are you even looking at me? You want to see my fancy hands? Come on. Anyways, those 3 factors, those 3 rules, and I will reiterate again. Load the tire before you use the tire. That's number 1. Your front tire is what does all the churning on a motorcycle. So if you load that front tire, if the weight of your bike is pressed forward and you have more normal force on that tire, it will give you more grip while you're churning. That makes your 100 points of traction more effective. Okay, that's rule number 1. Rule number 2, I don't even remember what rule number 2 is. Rule number 2 is, I don't know, you know what, anyways. I completely lost my train of thought, guys. I'm sorry, this is how it works with me. I'm not a professional. I've got professional equipment, but I don't even know how to use it, and I don't know how to write a script. So, deal with me as I come. Rule number 1 is the key, though. Load the tire before you use the tire. Oh, no, rule number 2 is the power steering thing. So, extra confidence is going to give you extra margin for error. Because think about it like this. If you're 100% through a corner without trail braking, is 40 miles an hour, then what I suggest is, on the street, you go 20 miles an hour. Now let's say when you're trail braking, your minimum speed is 45 miles an hour. I still suggest you go 20 miles an hour, but as you can see, your headroom has just increased 5 to 10%. It's pretty good, and that extra confidence can save your life. That 5 to 10% can be the difference between going off a cliff or going onto an incoming car and saving your life. So keep that in mind. Now number 3, which is really, 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 really important, and probably the number 1 reason you should be trail braking on the street, is that when some crazy stuff goes down and you need to slow down unexpectedly, you're already on the brakes. Again, CanyonChasers.net, they explain that so much better than I can, but if you're already on the brakes, you're gonna save like 2/3 of your stopping distance while you're leaned over. So now let's talk about how to apply the brakes while you're churning. How to trail brake. I hate that word. It's such a crappy word. The first thing you need to do is get out there with your bike in a parking lot, a flat driveway, anywhere where there's no cars, and push your bike around. Get off to the side of your bike, okay, and push it around. Walk around with your bike. That sounds so counterintuitive, but it's the key. Get your fingers on the brakes, okay, while you're pushing your bike, and squeeze, apply the brakes very gently until the brake pads start to resist your movement. Not until they stop you, until they start to resist your movement. This is probably just like a 1/10 of a millimeter beyond where the actual brake light switch kicks on. So your bike's off and you're pushing, you hear a little click. When you hear that little click, you're probably applying it. You're actually going to hear the brakes kind of like make this little shh kind of noise. Much quieter than that, but you'll hear it if there's not too much noise going on. But you'll definitely feel the bike start to slow down. So apply the brakes till the bike starts to slow down, and then smoothly release the brakes. Apply the brakes, release, apply. Do that a bunch. Do that until you can do that in your sleep. The next thing I want you to do is work on removing jerk from your stops. Now this is something that's very difficult, okay? Now when you're braking, typically what happens is you start braking like this, and I'm talking about braking to a stop. Your motorcycle goes like this, And then when the bike actually comes to a stop, it does this. It does a move that's kind of like this, down, up. Right, you're like braking at a constant rate, down, up. Braking at a constant rate, down, up. What you want to do is, you want to start practicing removing that down, up move at the end of your brake periods as you're coming to a stop as much as possible. Do this on your bikes, do this on your car, do this on everything, on your bicycle, do it everywhere. Get that concept into your head to get that jerk out of your stops. Now, why do you want to do this? Well, before I say why, how about I say the how? Jerk, and I'm gonna go way over your head here, and I'm sorry. Jerk is the third derivative of motion. Basically, so first thing you have is motion itself, the distance you travel over time. The first derivative is your velocity. The second derivative is acceleration. The third derivative is jerk. That jerk is what you want to eliminate. Now that's a third derivative. That's a third order effect. So it's very small, but it's extremely important because the technique involved in eliminating jerk is the technique that you need to be using every time you trail brake, okay? So here we go. Eliminating the jerk means right before the jerk is going to come on, right before your acceleration is going to suddenly change because you're coming to a stop, smoothly release those brakes so that at the exact point that you come to a stop, you have basically fully released the brakes. And when you do that correctly, you're going to be like this, and it's going to go down, up. So instead of like down, up, it's going to be like this, down, up. Just a little bit. You can never get rid of the jerk fully, but if you can reduce it as much as possible, you're going to be setting yourself up for success with trail braking. Now, why is this so important? Why is removing jerk so important? Think about it for a second. It's not a counterintuitive concept. It's a very intuitive one. Because jerk, as you can see, changes your acceleration. So, of your forks. So your forks, okay, as you're braking, right, you have your fork is right here. This is your tube on my hand here that's making a C, and this is your fork, up and down. So when you brake, when you're cruising along, your fork's in the middle. When you brake, your fork goes down. And then when you accelerate, your fork goes up, okay? So when you're going along and you're braking, you're gonna brake, like this, and then what's gonna happen at the end? Down, up. You don't want that to happen. Why don't you want that to happen? Well, think about it. That up part at the end there is removing normal force from your tire. So let's say you're braking from 60 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour. Again, you're going to get a less dramatic version of this. You're going to brake. You're going along straight. Sorry, you're going along straight. Brake. It's going to go down. Now, when you release the brakes really suddenly, you know what's going to happen? Boom! Your forks are going to fly up, and you're going to remove all that load from your front tire. Remember, the key to trail braking is keeping that load on your front tire. If you suddenly remove all that load from your front tire, well, guess what? You're going to slide the front. You're going to go from static friction to a less effective dynamic friction. And your chances of low siding or high siding or whatever are real. You're going to go down. It's going to happen. So if you slowly release the brakes, again, here we are in the center, brake, and then we slowly release, like that. Like that. So yes, we are getting the forks to decompress, but we're reducing that decompression as much as possible. That is the key. So I know I've been long-winded about this, guys. I know I'm talking over and over again. But that is very important. That release of the brakes is the key to safe and effective trail braking. Okay? And that's assuming you can do the first part. Apply the brakes effectively. So apply the brakes, load the tire before you use the tire, load the tire, use the tire. It's like a two-step process, almost. Now, I'm not saying to apply the brakes in 2 steps. But what I'm saying is apply the brakes slowly enough so that the tire is loaded before you really start to use it. The next thing is, when you go to release those brakes, release the brake lever nice and slowly so that the jerk of your i.e. your change in acceleration, does not upset the suspension. If you can do those 2 things, you can effectively trail brake on the street. Now, the third thing to remember is 100 points of grip. Okay, you have a certain amount of grip. You can use all of it for turning if you want. Please don't. You can use all of it for braking if you want. Please don't, unless it's an emergency. Or you can use all of it for acceleration. Please don't. But what you can't do is full turn and full acceleration. If you go to 200 points of grip, you're gonna you're gonna low side the bike or high side the bike, and you're gonna go off into a ditch and you're gonna die. It's just that simple. So I implore you, ride well below your fear threshold, okay? And when you ride below your fear threshold, you're going to be riding below your grip threshold. How do you figure out what 100 points of grip means? That's a question I'm asking you to figure out yourself. How are you going to decide what 100 points of grip means? For most people, deciding what 100 points of grip means figuring out what 101 points of grip means. So going just a little bit beyond the limits, crashing, repairing your bike, repairing yourself, and then getting back on the saddle and riding again. Well, I hate to say it, on the street that's not an option, because crashing can very well be the last thing you ever do as a human being. And I don't want to see you guys do that. I want to make this sport grow. I don't want to see people find their 100 points of grip by going beyond. I want to see people find that 100 points of grip never. You don't need to know what 100 points of grip means on your bike. You know what you need to know is how to stay alive, how to get home to your house, your condo, your apartment, your whatever, how to get back to your family, your friends, your loved ones, how to continue with your life. That's what's important. Motorcycling is a great activity. It's tons of fun. It's exhilarating. It actually works you out and burns calories. But at the end of the day, it is the most dangerous thing you're probably ever going to do in your life. So I implore you, don't make it more dangerous by trying to push that limits of grip. Because if you go to 101 points of grip, whether it be too much braking, too much turning, too much acceleration, or some kind of combination of those, let's be honest, it's going to make you crash. And as I've explained throughout this video, 100 points of grip is like a law. It only applies when your grip is static. When your suspension is going up and down, and when the weight of your bike is on the front tire and on the rear tire and going back and forth and stuff, what 100 points of grip isn't a constant thing. Your grip, the level of grip you have on your motorcycle is changing all the time. So trying to find that grip, I mean, on a street, you're asking to die. You're just asking for it, okay? So remember those 2 things, okay? If you're not trail braking by now, if I haven't convinced you by now, I don't know what is. But please, guys, even if you're not going to trail brake, do those 2 exercises. Number 1, just push the bike around and just feel that like point where the brake pads just start to bite a little bit. It doesn't even stop you, but it slows you down a little bit. That's all the trail braking you need to do. Do 99%, okay, not 99, but do like 95% of your braking in a straight line. And then instead of accelerating through the turn, just have your fingers on the brake enough to activate your brake light. That's it. If that's all the trail braking you ever do in your life, that's still super preferable to rolling on the throttle through the turn. Again, because it's putting normal force on your front tire and you're already on the brakes and already ready to slow down more when something bad happens. And then number two, if you're gonna start trail braking for real, i.e. applying, you know, say 20 points of your grip to braking and 20 points of your grip to churning or more, practice releasing those brakes. Because if you release the brakes too quickly, you're gonna have a bad day because the weight's just gonna, again, the front suspension's gonna just bounce up. And you wanna avoid that bounce. You wanna keep the front suspension from unloading as much as possible. It's always gonna unload beyond the center line, it has to. From a physical standpoint, it has to unload beyond the center line. But if you can reduce how much it unloads beyond that center line, you're going to increase your grip as you're coming out of the corner. You need to do that. If the suspension unloads too much too quickly, there goes your front. You're going to go down. And you might slide into oncoming traffic and get run over by a car. You just don't want that to happen. So guys, I thank you for watching, okay? I really appreciate all the support that I've been given, even though I do not do this for money. The last thing I want is money. What I want is more people to ride, but really what I want is more people to become riding enthusiasts. And by riding enthusiasts, I mean people who try to understand riding as much as possible. We're never going to truly understand all the equations that go into how a motorcycle works. We just aren't. We have to make numerical solutions through brute force on computers. That's just the way it goes. But I want people to kind of understand that. I want people to understand a little bit of math, a little bit of logic, a little bit of physics. Just keep that stuff in mind when you're riding, because it's going to save your life. It's going to allow you to ride more. It's going to allow you to spend more money on motorcycles, and spending more money on motorcycles is going to keep the industry alive and make things better for all of us. Motorcycling is the most dangerous physical activity you can do, pretty much. It is anywhere from 10 to 25 more times more dangerous than driving a car. And driving a car is, for most people, the most dangerous thing they do besides what? Eating salty foods and smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol. So anyways, guys, you have to understand, most crashes occur. For motorcycling, most crashes occur, it's your own fault. You went too fast into a corner, you didn't trail brake correctly, you target fixated, you did something really bad, and you caused your own fate. And that's why you're dead. And unfortunately, that's the case. And I hate to say it, but like, I'm gonna knock on wood right here. I have never gone wide in a corner. And I hope I never do, okay? So guys, anyways, I really thank you for listening to my little presentation, my little video here. Look up CanyonChasers.net. They're a great resource. They really don't mess around. Just do it. Do it every time. When you go out and you ride and you come home, I want you to think about your riding, okay? Now, thinking about your riding means, in this case, think about your braking. Did you jerk the bike coming to a stop? Did you establish, now if you're trail braking, did you establish those three factors? Your speed, your steering angle, and your brake pressure, the release of the brake lever, all at the same time? Did you do that every time? When you didn't do that every time, the one time or the two times or the three times you screwed it up, why did you screw it up? How can you avoid screwing it up next time? Okay? Think about it. Think about your riding.